I'm making this unusual video for the subscribers of the Non-Fraudulent Bodybuilding Podcast. Oftentimes, for those that don't know, every week I make a post on Instagram asking for questions from my subscribers for myself, Boston, and our guests to discuss on the show. Sometimes, because of the nature of my channel, the questions are not very relatable to Boston or the guest, so I sometimes have to skip them. But I feel bad doing so every week because I know that the subscribers have spent time asking those questions and probably want quick answers to them. So this week we had a bunch of those questions again, and it's about an hour before we record the podcast with Boston. I thought it would be good if, without any preparation, if I just went through the questions. What I did was I segmented the questions for the podcast. The ones that I thought maybe I wouldn't ask with Boston, to make sure they get answered, I put them in a separate document here, and I'll go through them with you. Now keep in mind, I haven't really researched any of these questions, so some of them will be simply that I don't know the answer to, but I thought that maybe the subscribers would appreciate it. If you guys do, leave a comment down below, let me know, and I'll keep doing these. So let's get started. We have a question from Mika. He says, taking exogenous growth hormone may lead to insulin resistance, high doses daily. This is not true. Taking growth hormone will lead to insulin resistance, whether it's a low or high dose, acutely. And this is just the nature of how growth hormone works in the body, whether it is natural or not. He then says, can the process be reversible? He says the ketogenic diet potentially presents the same problem if followed for long periods of time. Are there any solutions to mitigate and hopefully avoid this end result? Very good question, Mika. First of all, the ketogenic diet does not have the same kind of profile. In fact, they don't tell you this often, but you know how there are all these rodent studies with caloric restriction or fasting that extend rodents' lives? These caloric restriction studies, the effects depend on the exact strain of rodent, the exact strain of mouse, of lab mouse, in fact. Some lab mice actually live almost as long or longer with a ketogenic diet. So, and not only that, but consistently the ketogenic diets in rodents show the best preservation of brain function due to, I believe, the insulin sensitivity and lack of oxidative stress in the brain and so on. So I don't think you can really compare those two. In the case of acromegaly, when adults have high levels of GH for long periods of time, they do become very insulin resistant, and when treated, that insulin resistance reverses. It reverses. It is absolutely reversible. Not only that, it's really reversible. It may be reversible in almost all people that do not have really strong genetic predispositions. And the evidence for this is really in the study of obese people who get bariatric surgery to make their stomach smaller. A lot of them are insulin resistant or diabetic and can stop using insulin within a week or 2 weeks after the surgery without even losing much weight, simply due to the fast. If you want to learn more about this, there's a public educator called Jason Fung. Check him out. Watch some of his videos on YouTube. You'll learn that fasting is the quickest solution for insulin resistance. And in fact, I think people using growth hormone should definitely have fasting protocols through the year, because the issue is this. The issue isn't that, say, you use growth hormone for 5 years, you're insulin resistant. Later, you're diabetic. You can undo it if you fast and take care of your health, maybe. But you spent years insulin resistant. Those years you were hyperinsulinemic, which is very damaging to your health, and you had many other effects from the insulin resistance. You want to lessen those effects. So you probably have to have regularly scheduled fasts, both periodic fasts and maybe weekly, daily fasts, something like that. Let's move to the next question. Well, this guy, he always asks questions. I don't know how to pronounce his name, and I apologize for that. His name is something like Shroff Zyker. He said, what is your stance on yucca supplementation? I know what yucca is. I've never heard of its supplementation, to be honest with you, and I don't know much about it. And I try to refrain from talking on subjects that I don't know much about. The next question is by Bitcoin Bra. He says, for Leo, is it possible to avoid total shutdown or have a smoother PCT while taking drugs such as Clomid, HCG while on cycle? Interesting question. Or would you just be spinning your wheels? So no, absolutely. So Clomid, these are a weird mix. So Clomid, you would associate it with an AI. Clomid and AI work through the same pathway at inhibiting the negative stimulus to the hypothalamus, which is by reducing estrogen signaling at the hypothalamus in the brain. So if you have lower estrogen levels on cycle, you will be slightly less, I've just experienced this myself, but also scientifically, you would think that you'd be much less shut down. But in my experience, you'd be quite a bit less shut down, but nothing, the difference between having high estrogen on cycle and having like a progesterone related drug like Deca or Trenbolone, the Deca or Trenbolone shuts you down far more than having very high, sky high estrogen. But the estrogen still, if you keep it lower, you'll be a little bit less shut down and be better able to recover off cycle, definitely. Also, using HCG on cycle works through a different way. HCG on cycle actually may cause more inhibition to the hypothalamus, but what it does is keep your balls physically working. So potentially your balls atrophy less. If your balls do atrophy, you lose cells in there. You're not going to regrow those cells easily. You know, we don't have an unlimited number of stem cells in adulthood. So you want to protect them from dying. That's why I try to popularize this idea that you use HCG on cycle. The problem is previously, for those that didn't watch the conversation between Vigor Steve and I, historically, people used to scare us and tell us the LH receptor in the gonads desensitizes to HCG if you use it on cycle, so you could screw yourself up after cycle trying to use the HCG. This is totally incorrect. This is just forum BS, not true. There's no evidence of this. Nobody's experienced this. This is not true at all. You could definitely use it on cycle to keep. By the way, this is not medical advice. I'm also not a medical doctor. Don't take it. I'm just telling you my ideas. Next. Oh no, he asked one more question. He said, also, what are your thoughts on memantine as a tool to repair dopaminergic receptors? So for those that don't know, memantine is sort of like a less potent version of ketamine or PCP. It blocks a group of receptors that are notorious for causing neurotoxicity in excitatory states. These receptors are called NMDA receptors. They're part of the glutamate receptors. Glutamate is the major excitatory hormone in the brain, and GABA is the major inhibitory hormone in the brain. Glutamate works through various receptors. If there's too much glutamate, you develop oxidative stress in your brain and damage in your brain. When there is too much glutamate, the damage often happens through the NMDA receptors. These receptors are also very involved in the process of schizophrenia development and many other things. It's not a particular tool to repair specifically dopaminergic neurons, but if you're in a state of excitatory stress in your brain, blocking the NMDA receptors will lessen the damage that you cause to your brain. It will also do other things. It does other interesting things. For example, it can reduce your tolerance to opioids and other things like that. I'm not sure. Maybe there is some direct effect on dopaminergic receptors that I'm not aware of. But the reason I use memantine when I do use it is to, when I have a lot of excitation in the brain, say for example, I don't take amphetamines very often. I take 5 milligrams maybe 2 to 4 days a week sometimes. Sometimes I go weeks without it. But if I do take it, say for example I drank coffee at the same time, I know my brain is very excited, all right? I know there may be oxidative stress there. At that moment, I may choose to take memantine that day, just to lessen some of the damage potentially, because I'm really obsessed with not developing dementia in old age. So that's the reason. Next, Whitelock says, hey Leo, I was wondering about Berberine's effects on male testosterone. I've seen that metformin lowers male testosterone and Berberine lowers female testosterone, but I'm reading mixed information on Berberine in men. I don't know. I haven't reviewed the studies on the specific subject. I'm not really interested in testosterone levels, but let me tell you my thoughts. Berberine encourages you to be in a state of nutrient sensing. So there are nutrient sensing pathways in the body. They sense whether you're hungry, in need of food, or whether you have enough nutrients and you can grow. So Berberine encourages you, like metformin, to be in what's called the AMP kinase dominant pathway, which turns off mTOR. When you turn off mTOR, steroidogenesis in the gonads is also inhibited. So technically, if the Berberine was strong enough, if it really did work, which it doesn't, the long-term studies show that after 3 months, there's a lot of, not it doesn't totally, but there's a lot of, it's not like metformin, it's not that powerful. There's a lot of, not tachyphylaxis, but a reduction in the actual insulin sensitization after 3 months in some studies has been shown to decline in humans. So it's a bit weaker than metformin. But if it was stronger, yeah, it would inhibit some of your steroidogenesis for sure. The next question is by Davey Boy. Davey Boy is our MVS, most valuable subscriber on Instagram. Jax is of course the MVS on YouTube. David Boy is a wonderful guy, always comes to my defense on Instagram. Sometimes I find him like, I don't know what people are writing on Instagram. Sometimes I open my page and I find David Boy in an argument with somebody that insulted me. He's like 10 comments down arguing with the guy. He's a wonderful person. Anyway, he says, once I get my gyno surgery, should I use an AI? As clearly I convert lots, or can I do away with it? My cycles will start hitting a gram of test after. Much love to the three of you. Unfortunately, David Boyd, I could have asked this actually in the discussion, but I'll tell you. So when I got the gyno surgery, I stopped using AI entirely. You can do so. What's the effects going to be? If you have very high estrogen signaling, as we discussed before, you'll have more inhibition to the hypothalamic stimulation of the steroidogenesis. You'll also have potentially a venous. The most dangerous thing about having high estrogen levels is venous thrombotic veins. I don't know how they say it, venous. I've actually had this before, personally. It's quite rare, and it can be very dangerous. It is quite rare. You'll know if you're somebody prone to it quickly, actually, generally. But that's not always the case. You be careful. Other than that, the other dangers, of course, you inhibit some of the hypothalamic signaling, and also, as estrogen gets higher, your sex drive will start to get lower. Like as it goes above 40 in the US scale, your sex drive will slowly start to get lower. It's not like when estrogen crashes and you have no sex drive. It's a more slow thing. So it's like dichotomous on the lower end. Like if your estrogen goes below, for most males, if it goes below like 15 or so, at some point you'll suddenly have no sex drive. Whereas if it goes higher than 40, you'll slowly just start to have less and less sex drive. If you can handle it, as I know Davey Boy can, personally I would allow the estrogen to convert. Now, the history behind this, of course, is that many studies on androgen use in humans and rodents show that if you inhibit, not in humans actually, in rodents, show that if you inhibit conversion to estrogen, androgens can become neurotoxic or toxic to other cells of the body. Because of a lot of reasons. Estrogen is an antioxidant. Estrogen has many effects on the cardiovascular system, specifically dilating blood vessels. So it has many effects, but it's also estrogen has direct effects in the brain in particular for neurogenesis. Estrogen governs serotonin, which governs neurogenesis. Neurogenesis protects you from neurotoxicity. Androgens can be extremely excitatory and produce neurotoxicity. So that's the reason why you'd want to keep it up. Also, another reason is that it's simple. Women live longer than men. There's reasons behind that, and estrogen is one of them. Next, Thomas DeMeyer asks, he says, thoughts on tatka timing when on orals? Some say it lowers their bioavailability when taken together. I'm not sure about that. I also don't know how somebody could be sure of that. I mean, different drugs are I don't know. Maybe there's some study on this that I'm not aware of. However, if there is, it won't be a very significant impact. By the way, when you're thinking about tatka, you may want to look at adka also. Adka is the actual drug prescribed to cirrhotic patients in the US. And for example, Anabolic Pharmacist from Boston's Forum carries it. Adka is an alternative to tatka. There are other alternatives like OCA, for example. I personally would take it multiple times a day, just like Adka is given to patients twice a day. I take tatka personally 3 times a day, whether I'm taking orals or not, which right now I am actually taking. Before workout, sometimes I take an oral androgen, and I always take tatka with it. Whether it does not, I mean, it doesn't do it significantly. It doesn't affect it significantly. Otherwise, I would have noticed myself. So it's not that significant. I wouldn't worry about it. But the effects are quite potent. So tatka is not only an antioxidant, but it has direct impact on liver function that's tremendous. It's not just through the cholestasis effects. It has many other effects. So does adka. Jimbo Slice McNeil says, adult neurogenesis from the use of nootropics. So a nootropic, by the way, is something that acutely improves brain function without stimulating someone. That's the traditional definition. Sometimes not acutely, but in either case, not stimulatory. So I just made a video on cerebrolysin. There are many phytochemicals and drugs that cause neurogenesis, the most notable of which are the antidepressant class, the SSRIs. You also have cerebrolysin, you have 7,8 dihydroxyflavone, which is an agonist of the BDNF receptor, TRK-C. And there are many other compounds. For example, amitriptyline is an SSRI that directly binds to the receptors for nerve growth factor and brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it acts like growth factors in your brain, this SSRI. There are many other drugs, the most powerful of which, to my knowledge, is cerebrolysin. And why would you want neurogenesis as an adult? Well, you do create new neurons in 2 places of the brain as an adult, and they're small places. But the main effect really is, other than the plasticity, is the protection. Growth factors protect cells from death. And there are a couple of common factors in all dementias, like inflammation in the brain, but the main thing is the death of neurons. So if you can protect your neurons as you age, it may be like some kind of safeguard against dementia. At least that's my approach personally. Not only that, but neurogenesis also has an antidepressant effect, an anxiolytic effect, reduces anxiety, so it's something attractive generally. Armesh Singh, who always asks good questions that I often don't get to answer on the podcast. He says, does tatka on orals help with lipids? Yes, it does. Tatka or adka, they do affect your lipids. They may lower, I think, your triglycerides in particular, but a little bit. It's not that important. He asked for my opinions on some kind of testosterone called Nebido Test U for TRT, for someone who hates frequent injections. I don't know what that is. In general, the longer acting a compound is in your body, the more desensitized you will become to it. So if you have a compound that comes in and out and is not stable, your body won't adapt as well to it. If it is very stable, your body will adapt as much as possible to it. Those are a couple of things to think of. If you don't like injections, to be honest with you, you shouldn't be messing around with androgens. You just screw yourself up. Because then you can't take HCG, for example. HCG has to be minimum twice a week. If you can't take HCG, you're really going to screw yourself up. Unless you really don't like your balls and you don't mind them being destroyed. But you're going to have to like injections. You're going to have to figure your way out around them. There are ways to make injections completely painless and easy to do also. So you have to get to that point, I think. This is not medical advice. I'm just talking as if it was myself. He then says, Stan Efferding recommends never running an AI on test cycles. How is this safe? How is this safe? You're afraid of the venous thrombos, whatever it is, thrombotic veins. No, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at me not being able to say the word. But even if you had gynosurgery, wouldn't all that E2 from aromatization make your blood pressure skyrocket? No. I've taken 2 grams of testosterone or 3 grams before for short periods of time with no AI and controlled my blood pressure fine. That's not the thing. You have now a very protective compound across your body. Stan's advice is really great and considerate. A very good idea. I think so, at least. Unless you're prone to venous whatever the hell it is, thrombotic veins. If you are, but that means when a vein gets like stuck with blood, it like gets engorged, and it can, if it happens in the wrong place, it could kill you. If you're prone to that, that's a different story. So there probably are like 5% or 10% of males that shouldn't let it aromatize, but who knows who they are, you know what I mean? And I'm probably one of them, but it didn't hurt me either. Then he says, since Anavar is 3 times more anabolic than Test E. What do you mean? What do you mean? How do you know that? What is anabolism, first of all? Because this is not a universal term. These studies where you see it's 3 times more anabolic, they're tested on like chickens. Or not chickens, but roosters. Like they see how big the rooster's male things the androgenic things grow, how big the rooster grows. Well, that's a different species. These things have not been tested properly in humans to say this is 3 times more anabolic. And if it is 3 times more anabolic, what does it work around? How is it anabolic? Because anabolism happens through different growth factors in the body. I bet you Anavar's anabolism is different in character to testosterone. Just FYI. But anyway, say it was. So he says, can I take 30 milligrams Anavar daily with TRT or HCG as a test base, to make equal gains as 600 milligrams Test E cycle? The only downside I see is Anavar negatively affects lipids more than Test E. You can't equate these kind of things. They're really, I mean, it depends on the person. Like I was saying, Anavar probably works through different pathways in the body. We have different genetics for those pathways. I bet you there are some people who will benefit more from Anavar than other people to the degree that they may prefer it more than others. With that said, using HCG and another compound that isn't test is a very rational approach. Like there are many people who can take HCG 1,500 units every other day and end up with a test level of 1,300 or 400. You know, so they have a strong test level. Then they can do whatever else they want. They won't be shut down. They have that test for sex drive and so on. Okay, these are getting a little bit long. Next, Rama Fernandez Madero says, guys, is injectable Winstrol less harmful than taking it orally? Let me answer that question. It would be, because Winstrol is androgenic and it has, I believe, caused liver cancers before. I'm quite sure. It is very dangerous for the liver, but not as dangerous, of course, as Anadrol and Dianabol. But with that said, injecting it, you avoid the first pass of the liver. However, if you inject it with with like very potent solvents, or with an oil that you're allergic to somehow, or your body recognizes as toxic, you may end up causing so much inflammation in the body that the first pass through the liver may have been better for you. Or, for example, you may be somebody with a weak liver. So you really want to avoid the liver issues, but you get inflammation, you don't mind. There may be another guy that has a stronger liver, but is prone to autoimmune issues, so you know what I mean? So it depends on the person. You can't answer this for everybody. And he says, how many weeks per year could it be run to be safe? You cannot be safe running androgens. Let me be clear. You could be somebody that ran just, testosterone at a high, at like 750 milligrams a year and got liver cancer or heart failure or whatever. There's nothing safe here. There's nothing safe. Just to be clear. He asked also, he said, I heard some folks claiming tren makes them feel on top of the world, literally completely changing their confidence. Why would this be? How does impact the brain in this form? Well, say you're somebody that's not naturally anxious. You don't have an overactive sympathetic nervous system. Say you're one of those people that is lazy, doesn't get much energy, doesn't have much drive. You know, those melancholic people that don't care about anything. They're not really involved. Well, maybe they have low dopamine signaling, low adrenaline signaling, low sympathetic nervous activation. So for them, taking a small amount of tren, and by the way, when they say this, they're not talking about 100 milligrams of tren a day. Everybody's going to get screwed with that. But say they take 50 milligrams, well, not 200 a day, let's say. Everybody will get screwed with that. But say they're taking 50 or 25 or up to 100. If they were in a state that was not highly sympathetically nervously driven, and they take that, it may feel awakening to them. It may feel like what some people with ADHD feel when they take methylphenidate, Ritalin. They get excited, you know? What it does is, I don't know exactly what tren does, but I know what the androgen receptor does. It modulates a lot of sympathetic nervous activity in the brain. It modulates dopamine signaling, adrenaline signaling. In the long term, I think it downregulates a lot of those systems, especially the dopamine system, not the adrenaline system. But in the short term, it can make someone feel really alive, confident, and also aggressive, and so on. And some people really feel those effects. Other people drives them insane, and it could be because of their different basal state, you know? Also, because of their metabolism of the drug and so on. If somebody metabolizes drugs very slowly and another person metabolizes it very quickly, the one who metabolizes it very quickly will feel less of a negative impact overall from an overdose than another person, right? So there's also the metabolism issues, the structure of their brain, their basal states, and they're all the different receptors that work in their body, which we don't know what trenbolone works over exactly because they're metabolites. It's very complex and not really studied in humans. And he said, next he says, I never tried it myself, but thinking of adding a very low dose to my TRT, 125 test, 100 tren. Okay, so that's a very, very low dose. So if you're somebody that's not very stimulated, it may impact you that way. But really, I would try to stay away from this drug that we know has caused so many kidney failures. We just in arm wrestling lost a guy in the last 2 years to kidney failure. I'm not going to say who he is, but from his trenbolone use, and it's quite well known. Trenbolone is a very dangerous drug. Be very careful. And then next, Wilcock. Wilcock says, that's an interesting name. His last name is similar to, his last name is Cocke, which is, you would think it's an unfortunate name, but my mother's side of the family, there's one group of the family that belonged to a family called the Cox family, C-O-X, which is even more troublesome. These are ancient names apparently. Anyway, Wilcox says, during prep, coffee becomes something I crave, probably for the energy from caffeine. Is caffeine bad at that point? Well, I don't know much about prep, but what I do know about bodybuilders doing prep is that they seem to have high heart rates. They seem to be really sympathetically nervously driven. They don't sleep well and so on. Well, the damage to the heart when you're in that kind of adrenaline fueled state is basically the heart beats too often and it starts to cause damage to itself. Like you develop fibrosis and things like that. If you're in that state, your heart rate is high and you drink basically the fear is of your heart rate. Caffeine is healthy for the brain, but the issue is the heart rate. So if you're monitoring your heart rate and your blood pressure and you don't get affected much by it, I wouldn't be concerned about it. But if your heart rate is, for example, the resting heart rate during prep is probably around 85, I bet you. If it is, I wouldn't do it because you'll notice that your heart rate will go really high. And then you're going to be doing your cardio later. You might be taking other things. I would be careful about it. Then he asks about artificial sweeteners such as stevia. Stevia is an antioxidant. Stevia is actually healthy. But there are other artificial sweeteners. The things that they spread about them, like claiming that they're so toxic for you and stuff like that, is not really true. Sugar is far more toxic than aspartame, than all of them. But comparatively. But if you look at aspartame by itself, it's of course it has many horrible effects, none comparable to sugar. But stevia is a different story. Stevia is an antioxidant. Randy 2.0 says, can you inject melanotan 2, HCG, and GH in the same syringe or any combo of those together? I feel like a human pincushion. Hey, Randy. I always say good morning to Randy. He always comments on the channel. You absolutely could. There's no reason not to, especially if it's short term. You're not leaving it in the fridge so that they don't interact with each other for long. I think even if you left it in the fridge, it would be fine. I've done that before. But I'm sad to hear that you're putting your GH in a syringe, which means that you don't have pharmaceutical GH. It's very unfortunate. The pharmaceutical GH is far, far superior. I mean, maybe you get this, it's just superior in terms of your lifestyle. You look better when you take pharmaceutical GH as compared to the other GHs, which I assume is the reason you're taking it. Classy615 says, I love the word classy, by the way. I find this word funny. He says, if estrogen is in healthy range while you're running a SERM, which is a selective estrogen receptor modulator like Nolvadex and Clomid, he says, will you still get positive benefits of estrogen, i.e. neural protection, cardiovascular benefits, or will you be blocking the positive benefits just like I don't know what he's saying. So that's a good question. You will be blocking them depending on the SERM. The SERMs function slightly differently with different estrogen receptors in different places of our bodies. So for example, Clomid is notorious for inhibiting estrogen signaling in the brain, which is why it causes such a horrible mood for women and men, you know? So it depends on the serum. A lot of them will inhibit it in one place and increase estrogen signaling in another place. Overall though, yes, it will limit some of the benefits. M.H. Damon says, firstly, I wanted to say how amazing these podcasts are, and I learned a lot. I'm glad to know that, brother. He says, my question is, you spoke about testosterone metabolism with Dylan as to how compounds absorb quick or slow. How does one determine that by looking at a blood test? I got put on TRT for primary hypogonadism. Damn. Sustanon 250 every 10 days and 500 IU HCG twice weekly. Interesting. My total testosterone went from 324 to 366 after completing 4 injections, which kind of surprises me. Appreciate the answer. Yeah, that means you may not have been as primary hypogonadal as you thought. It's a very interesting situation. So anyway, in this case, I can't say specifically about you. I don't know if the injection was real. You have to keep in mind one thing. Before you started taking this HCG and the Sustanon, your balls were working 100%. Once you put the 500 units of HCG twice a week, your balls are working like it's some minority of the ability that they can work. So you've just lost your natural test production, probably at least like 70% of it or 50% of it, and then you try to replace it with the Sustanon. Sustanon has some long-acting esters and some very short-acting esters. So depending on the time you inject the Sustanon, your blood levels will really be different. It's a horrible drug, Sustanon. I mean, in my opinion, horrible. I cannot stand Sustanon. It's a horrible, horrible kind of testosterone. Just shit. I'm sorry to swear, but it's crap. It's really crap. But sorry, I got a little bit upset. But the point is, it's going to be unstable, especially at the beginning. Sorry, I talked a little bit too much. The long and short of it is this. Some people will inject, and it depends on the drug. Different drugs are metabolized by not only the drug, but the formulation of the drug. Different drugs are metabolized by different liver enzymes. A lot of them belong to a group called the CYP enzymes. We have different polymorphisms for each one of those enzymes, and they really affect how we metabolize different drugs. So there may be some drugs that you'll metabolize very slowly and others that you metabolize very quickly. What I've noticed when I've been looking at people's genes is a lot of people are fast metabolizers in general or slow metabolizers in general. But anyway, there's some difference. So some people will inject 200 milligrams of testosterone a week and it will improve their testosterone levels. That's why Derek and Steve, for example, recommend people on their first cycle try only 100 milligrams of testosterone. For other people like me that are fast metabolized, 100 milligrams of testosterone will probably lower my total test level if I started using it. I've done things like that before, and that's what happens. So that's what it is. You're probably a quick metabolizer, but we don't know exactly. Anyway, next, Jakey Ryan says, any tips on how to clear up hyperpigmentation from acne and stretch marks? And do you know why certain skin types can develop stretch marks and scarring easier than others? I know this can increase with age because of the decline of collagen, but are there certain genetic traits that may leave you more vulnerable in general? Cheers. Yeah, I think so, but I don't know anything about this. I've barely studied the biology of the skin in general, and I don't know anything about the genetics of these collagen. Well, I know a little bit of collagen, but not in relation to skin. So basically, I don't know the answer. But about hyperpigmentation, just FYI, I also don't know much about this, but I just want to let you know, there are very treatable approaches. For example, one of them is to go to a dermatologist. They have lasers, especially on your face. They can completely remove hyperpigmentation, completely. The reason why I say this is I'm half Arab. I spent half of my life in Arabia, and Arabs frequently get hyperpigmentation, and the Arabic women get it a lot, and they always do these lasers. Their skin is completely like the same color. So you can definitely do that, and it's probably not so damaging. There's also other ways. I believe, for example, tretinoin may have effects on it also, but there's a lot of things you can look. By the way, I have a video coming out soon called How to Research. Check it out. You can research as well as I can. I'm going to try to give you some introduction to it, and that'll hopefully make the conversation between all of us more sophisticated also. Next, Alpha Dad 67 said, Leo, have you ever heard of a study indicating that Anavar raises TSH labs? I'm 53, a forum member, and on TRT, Cypionate and Deca for 2 years. I've done a full recomp, which has been life-changing in every way. I was prescribed Anavar for 10 weeks at 25 milligrams. Afterwards, labs showed TSH above 80. 5 weeks later, above 40. 3 weeks later, above 20. I've been on Synthroid for many years due to hypothyroidism. Anavar seems to have interfered with Synthroid in some way. I really like Anavar, so I'd like your advice. Thanks. There's clearly you have thought through this question very well, Alpha Dad. I apologize for not being more helpful. I don't know of any androgenic effects on TSH yet. I'd like to look into it. This is a great question. I'm glad you asked this. I'll look into it and try to get back to you. Finally, and sorry for not having an answer now. Finally, Emmanuel Kuluk. And by the way, about that, just for people to know, if your TSH is 80, this is a very severe issue, huh? So I didn't want to comment on this, but this guy may have some interesting thyroid issues, not just hypothyroidism. He may have some kind of, I'm curious to know if he has some kind of autoimmune thyroid condition. You can also check for antibodies for that. And also, if you do ever, guys, have a TSH above 10, you have to take it very seriously. Something weird is going on. And this could be because your pituitary is overactive. So you may want to check not just TSH, but other hormones that are released by your pituitary to see, is it the pituitary? Or is it something interesting that's happening with the thyroid specifically? But anyway, I'll try to answer your question later and look into it. Finally, Emmanuel Kuluktish. Emmanuel Kuluktish says, if someone competes naturally or has been suppressed due to cutting for summer, should he do a PCT after the show to restore HPTA? Is tamoxifen enough in this case? That's Novadex. He probably shouldn't, but just to answer your question, if you lower estrogen in any male, his testosterone will increase. That's just how it works, especially if the person is obese, but in general, that's the case. Now, I'm not sure when you're cutting how much estrogen you really have, so you may have less of a ability to manipulate the hypothalamus, but if you do lower estrogen, you will improve the ability for the hypothalamus to recreate gonadotropin releasing hormone and begin the cycle at a higher level. Also, you should check out my opiate video, something like naltrexone, or actually naloxone preferably. Something like 50 milligrams of naloxone taken every other day with the AI or with Novadex, it's up to you, will probably improve the results. I'm quite certain it will. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for bearing with me. Let me know if you like this kind of thing. I know I didn't put much preparation into it, but really the reason why I did this is out of respect for the subscribers. I don't want to ignore you guys' questions. I don't want you to think I don't care about them. It's just difficult to ask the questions when Boston and those guys are there. So hopefully, if you guys have questions directed to me in the future, I can make these separately if you like them. And hopefully they'll be helpful. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me, and I'll see you next time.